My big picture view of what is a hypothesis is that it's a way of expressing your curiosity about your world. Hi, my name is Ritu Raman. I'm an assistant professor of mechanical engineering at MIT. One class that I particularly loved throughout school was English, because I feel like when you read, you get to explore a lot of new, exciting worlds. And when you write, you get to create new worlds and new experiences for people. And though I ended up in science, the great thing about my job is that I have to do a lot of writing, because I have to explain to people, here are the things we're excited about, here are the experiments we did, here's why we think those experiments are important. And that's how people learn about our work. So I ended up having to do a lot of writing anyway, which has been a really, really nice thing that I wouldn't have been able to predict as a middle schooler. Our lab is really interested in understanding how muscle talks to other types of cells inside our body in response to exercise. So our question is, what causes nerves to grow towards muscles? There might be a few different ways that we could hypothesize answers to this question. So hypothesis 1 could be physical movement of the muscles pulls the nerves towards the muscle. Hypothesis 2, muscle releases chemicals that attract nerve growth. Hypothesis 3, nerves do not grow towards muscles. Hypothesis 4, nerves only grow towards bone. And hypothesis 5, nerve cells grow better than muscle cells. So looking at these hypotheses, some of them are things that we can ask and test and are valid, and some of them not so much. For example, hypothesis 4, that nerve only grows toward bone, that one doesn't really make a lot of sense, because we know in our bodies that nerves grow towards a lot of different types of tissues, and it's not really related to our question about muscle and exercise. Hypothesis 5 also has a little bit of a problem, because we haven't really defined what better means. What does it mean for a nerve cell to grow better than muscle? Is it growing faster? Is it growing bigger? And is that really related to exercise? We're not sure. So I think if I were to design an experiment, hypothesis 4 and 5 are not really experiments that I could design. So we wanted to think about how we would test all of these hypotheses, right? So I mentioned before that part of how we wanted to do our experiment was not in an animal or in a human, but in a petri dish. So first, we grew muscles and neurons next to each other, and we exercised the muscles, and we saw that the neurons were growing more towards the muscle. So that was great, and it told us that hypothesis 3 was definitely wrong, right? And nerves did want to grow towards the muscle. But it didn't really tell us a lot about hypothesis 1 or 2, because when both of the cell types are there, the muscles are moving a lot, and the muscles are releasing potentially chemicals that might be attracting nerve growth. So how can you really tease those two things apart in this type of experiment? You can't. So we started to think about, whether we'd be able to grow the cells in two different petri dishes and then control what the nerves were feeling at different times. So the first thing we tried was growing the muscle in a separate dish, collecting the chemicals that it released, and then adding those to the neurons and seeing how the neurons responded. And we saw that they grew a lot more. They grew a lot farther, and they grew a lot faster. So that told us that hypothesis 2 was correct. So muscle does in fact release chemicals that attract nerve growth. But just because hypothesis 2 is correct doesn't mean that hypothesis 1 is wrong. We also wanted to see whether we could recreate the forces that muscle was generating during contraction or movement without there being any muscle cells there. So we had to do a couple different modifications where we made a new material It was sort of like a soft jelly that moved around a lot. And we grew the neurons on that soft jelly and made it move. And so the neurons felt like they were being pushed on and pulled on, even though there wasn't any muscle there. And we saw that the neurons actually grew a lot more and a lot farther and a lot faster, just like before, even without any of the chemicals that were being released by muscle. So this told us that hypothesis 1 was also correct. So only by sort of thinking about our experiments very carefully and testing one variable at a time were we able to understand which of these hypotheses were true and which weren't true. And of course, as we mentioned before, hypotheses 4 and 5 weren't really tied to our research questions, and so we didn't really design any experiments that were related to those. So creating a hypothesis to answer a question that you have is pretty challenging because probably the questions you have are really big questions and very interesting questions about something that you've observed. But hypotheses should be very specific. So when you have a very big question, one of the things that I was very challenged by when I was a younger scientist was that I would try to answer 100 hypotheses with one experiment. And that doesn't really work because you can only change one variable at a time and ask one question at a time. And so learning how to construct each single experiment so that I was only asking one question and addressing one hypothesis was very challenging because I had to learn how to be patient, but that did help me become better at asking and answering questions. The nice thing about science is that as you keep doing it, you keep learning from your past mistakes, and you become better and better at it over time.
Did you enjoy this video? It's actually part of a free unit on weaving hypotheses. Check it out in the link in the description below. While you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe.